From I'm Alliance Productions, this is Singletrack, episode 305. I am your host, Matthias Eichler. This show is brought to you by Electric Cable Car, your daily source of mountain news and updates on the culture and business of trail running. Here is what's happening at Electric Cable Car. What a week. It's packed with super important stories. Let's get to it. Tailwind Nutrition is adding Dow Watermelon to the permanent lineup of endurance fuel flavors. The watermelon lime flavor that was launched last year to much hype in partnership with Courtney Dow Water is now becoming a permanent flavor in the lineup, made make you run as fast as Courtney. Free Trail announces a new industry conference called TrailCon, held in the week between Broken Arrow and Western States in Olympic Valley in California. I share some initial thoughts on this big announcement on the blog. In a longer article, I put some first thoughts around how I think fastest known time should evolve, or rather, what it should be replaced by. This will probably turn into a little series of articles addressing various comments I received back from folks, and when I get more ideas on how to refine the larger idea of running epic routes that aren't races and how to collect and share them. Fastest known time 2.0. Lastly, Sport Hunger, a German nutrition online store, sent Spring Energy's awesome sauce to the lab, and the results are what we expect, not great. Visit electriccablecar.com to stay up to date with everything that's happening in the world of trail, ultra, and mountain running, and sign up for our newsletter where I send out a summary of the latest stories and posts once a week, once every 2 weeks. All right. Friend of the show and frequent running partner Ben Mead is here to tell his story of his epic battle to take on Cocodona 250. And spoiler alert, he gets it done. Huge congrats to Ben on such a feat. This episode is long, almost as long as Cocodona, so settle in and get to know Ben, his motivation that leads to borderline obsession, and his ultimate fight and conquest of running or shuffling 250 miles in the Arizona desert. All right, let's get to it. Here is Ben.
Yeah, well, I'm stoked to be here. I have a lot of maybe interesting things to say, especially for those who haven't run a 200+ mile race before. I think this is my first time, so I'm experiencing everything for the first time, and I'm having all kinds of fun experiences. It's almost been a week since I finished, and it feels like it was just yesterday. I'm still dreaming at night about chasing cutoffs. I'm still dreaming about how I have to be up and I have to keep going, and dreaming about the trails. And yeah, it's still in me. And I will also say, just anecdotally, yesterday, well, first of all, I haven't put on shoes since the race.
Yes.
Because my feet are very, very bad. But I'm in my UFOs and socks, just for the sake of the public, yesterday at Costco. And the cart is fairly full, and I'm pushing the cart to the car. And I started to tear up because it was so freaking hard to push that cart because I have no energy. I've never experienced fatigue on this level before after a run or a race. And so it's really, really weird to still be a little lightheaded and I feel like I just have bones in my legs, but I have no muscles in my legs.
It is amazing. So I want to pull this really far back. And that is years ago, you and I started running, and we talked about UTMB. We talked about this idea of we're trail running. I mean, years and years and years ago, you were the impetus that I even started running. You came into my shop and you were like, look, dude, you look fat. No, you never said that. We talked about life or whatever, and you were saying running is not so bad. And I always said, unless I have a soccer ball in front of my feet, I'm not moving. And you encouraged me, and I started running and whatever. Now I have a podcast or whatever. But anyway, throughout this time, we eventually started actually running together. And then we talked about UTMB, and it wasn't so much. There was a moment where it was really about UTMB, but it was sort of about this, okay, we are at this point weren't really approaching 50 yet, but we are at this point where you have to sort of set a goal and you don't really know if you can get there, and it needs to be something amazing because why else are you going to get yourself out of, onto a training run every single week, day,
Yeah.
whatever, right? And then something happened, and this crazy idea came into your head to run not just something hard, not just something long, but something crazy, crazy, crazy Cocodona. So you
Yeah.
have to sort of like tell me a little bit of like
Yeah.
how you ended up there.
Well, thank you for acknowledging that I'm the one that introduced you to running. I appreciate that. But what's fun about that is, this is more than a decade ago. And I was running on the roads and I did actually complete a road marathon at one stage. And you and I hadn't talked in a bit, and reconnected with you, and you said, I ran this thing called the Hillbilly Half, and it was in the Capitol Forest. And I'm like, wait, it's not on the road. So, in as much as I introduced you to running, you introduced me to the trails. I had never even heard of trail running before you did that race. And it really inspired me to get off the roads because I wasn't loving it anymore. And I don't know, I think my marathon PR is like 7 hours or something ridiculous. You have to understand too, like this is back in the day when I was frustrated with my speed
Mhm,
and I didn't understand why I wasn't faster. And I was really beating myself up for being as slow as I was. But the trails really set me free and made me feel alive and made me feel amazing. And it's so interesting, like you and I have never lost touch over the years,
mhm,
and yet we will like disconnect temporarily for a month or two, right? We're not talking every single day. It might even a month might go by, right?
yeah.
So then I hear about the Hillbilly Half. Then like a month or two later, I just randomly see you at the parking lot at Squaxin Park,
Mhm,
and I'm like, I saw this video about UTMB, and you're like, yes, of course, this is the thing, and we get all stoked on it, and the how I get to Cocodona, the short version is that over the years I learned about the fact that I was slow as a runner and what that meant, and I learned about being DNF, and I learned about being DFL, and I learned about chasing cutoffs. And I really have always, the 100-mile distance and UTMB sort of being the crown jewel of all of that, um, was always super intriguing. But what I learned over time was there are very few races anywhere on the globe that are 100 miles that I can beat the cutoff.
mhm,
Very few. And if there are any out there, it's like, oh, well, yeah, they just do this like loop and like, it's not an epic, cool race.
mhm,
All the epic, cool races that are 100 miles, I just simply can't beat the cutoff. And I remember then, you fast forward multiple years and I saw a random video on um, this is back when Jamil was still doing Mountain Outpost regularly, or Mountain Outhouse, or whatever it's called. And they introduced Cocodona for the first time. But this is before the first year even started, and I thought, wow, that is incredible. And then I saw West Plate's video from the first year,
mhm,
and I was like, hey, that guy looks like me. Just
mhm,
just being honest, like, West Plate is not like a super tall, super jacked dude, right? He's like around my age and he looks like around my body type. And I was like, hey, he's not running.
mhm,
Like you saw him hiking for hours and hours and hours. And I was like, does that mean that the cutoffs are enough in a race like that that someone like me could actually do it?
mhm,
And then I started to get really inspired around the concept of 200s. I've really fell in love with Cocodona. I hope my boss isn't listening because Cocodona week for the last 3 years prior, I've gotten no work done because I've just been in the live stream the entire time, just completely obsessed with this race. And it was a little over a year ago when I decided in my own little heart that I wanted to take it on in 2024.
it's an amazing story, and I'm going to pull myself parallel to that because to on Sunday, like 2 days from now, I'm going to run my very first road marathon. So maybe I'm
Oh,
going to make all the mistakes that you've already made or whatever, and I'm going to eat shit on Sunday and going to feel really, really slow and going to be really, really defeated. But um, it is sort of an interesting challenge in trying to find the events that work for us. And I think you explain
mhm.
it really well, right? You don't just want a 4 mile loop course or whatever, where you can sort of like, okay, finally I made it to 100 and I got my buckle, but I literally looped, right? It need epic courses are the ones that get us out of bed and allow us to dream and allow us to they give us something to live for, if you will, right?
Yeah,
These sort of
exactly.
adventures, right? Especially because for us, it's not about racing. For us, it's not about competing, right? It is about having these adventures. And I don't know. I mean, maybe we could just like, I don't know, fast pack ourselves too. But it is fun to be part of an event and a race like
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
um, I've had a few months ago Jack Rosenfeld on the podcast, and he attempted 600 milers and DNF'd every single one of them. And then he jumped into a 200 miler and was able to complete it, right? So there is definitely something beautiful about these races, and I hope that race directors are not going to catch wind of that and start eventually pulling the cutoffs closer because
Mhm.
as the front runners get faster, right? Maybe there's going to be an adjustment. I hope that it never happens, because when you first told me that you wanted to do Cocodona, and me knowing of your struggles with speed and knowing of your struggles in races to finish, to make cutoff, I had thought you had absolutely no chance of finishing it. I mean, I'm saying
Yeah,
this very, very, very early on, right? I
yeah, yeah.
mean, I'm not, I wasn't thinking bad of you, but I was like, I mean, in the same way, I wouldn't be able to finish UTMB at this point, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
just a realistic look at like this is sort of a dream too far,
Mhm.
and then he kept bringing it up, and I was like, damn, he is not letting go of this thing.
Yep. And at some stage, I think somewhere around, keeping in mind, like I kind of made this decision or set this goal. I wouldn't call it a decision, but I would say I set the goal more than a year out. And I would go back to like January of last year, or of like 2023, I guess, January
Mhm,
2023, when I ran one of our local 25K races. And I was like, okay, this is the first race of my training block.
mhm,
And it wasn't until September or so that I hired a coach, the amazing Alicia Jenkins Bauer, that I am so grateful to for her amazing coaching, because without her I would never have made it.
mhm,
It wasn't until September that I really took on a full-time coach, the amazing Alicia Jenkins Browder, who recently got married. So she's formerly Alicia Jenkins and now Alicia Browder, and started really working with her. And again, kind of coming back to thanking you because you had suggested her to me. One of the things that really appealed to me about Alicia is that she had finished the race in 2023, and that she finished, like really strong. I think she was eighth place for the women that year. So she had a lot of like intel about the course and a lot of direct experience that was, less than a year old. And she'd also done other 200s, and she lives in the Pacific Northwest.
mhm.
So she knows what it's like to try to train for a desert race when living in the Pacific Northwest. So I knew I could not do this without a coach. And so it was, yeah, roughly September when I started working with her.
Mhm. That's when you jumped in and took the serious that you took a coach, because it's also a financial commitment, right? I mean, it's not something to take on lightly. But when you started working with her, that's when I was like, okay, you have a chance. I mean, I don't have any visibility into how well you do. Well, I mean, I'm working with a coach now for a while too, with you know, mediocre success on my end. But I also realize that it's about how much I'm giving my coach in feedback for them, right? Remote coaching for them to truly understand of where I'm at and what I can do, right? So I don't have any visibility in that piece. But for you knowing, for me seeing that you committed yourself on that, and I was like, okay, that gives you a fighting chance.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you recommending her. I would say if you look at every single workout, strength workout and running workout that was prescribed from, you know, doing strides on flat road to doing hill repeats, which were quite intense, to doing the back-to-back long runs. I never did doubles. Like not, I never did 2 runs in a day, but I did lots and lots and lots of weekends that were Saturday and Sunday, back-to-back long runs. And all the things that she had me do with respect to like, once I got my full kit, my full like first 50K kit where you had to carry all the water and had all the required gear, and I was doing my back-to-back long runs, 20 plus miles with all of the required gear both days. I think if you look at it all and you take it all into summation, I probably did 85% of what I was instructed to do, which I think is from a percentage point of like like doing the coaching, like
Mm.
doing the workouts, I think that's pretty dang good.
If you explain this a little bit more, if you say 85%, they mean she told you 25 miles and you ended up doing 20 miles or
No, I mean that like so in any given week there might be like three strength training workouts and 5 runs,
okay.
and I would do 5 runs and one, maybe two strength training
Oh,
workouts.
oh,
So that's usually where I would skip it. I did all the runs and I
mhm,
did all the miles,
mhm,
and I did all the hill repeats and I did all the other stuff, unless something extraordinary happened, like getting sick or something like that.
sure.
Along the way you're going to miss a workout or two, but I did all the running for the most part. I did skip a little of the strength training.
Well, a quick shout out to Team Run Run, which are my coach is co-founder of Team Run Run, and Alicia is a coach on the Team Run Run platform.
Yeah.
And for me, I used to be very frugal. Looking at running is easy, right? All you need is a pair of running shoes, right? And the longer you go and the more you are serious about your goals, right? Not necessarily about your performance and competition, but about your goals. There's this point where you're like, you put thousands of dollars into the race registration, the travel, the gear, right? Why would you skip on a few hundred extra dollars for coaching when
Yeah.
this could really give you a a chance? And for me, aside from having a partner that can really build a training plan, which is already super helpful. You would have had to build a training plan yourself, right? And that would have been an insane amount of work. And letting somebody else do this is already worth a lot. But beyond that, the knowledge that, as you what you described, the knowledge of somebody who's done that particular race and it
Hmm.
can it really understands your questions, your fears, your thoughts, and and has had success in it, I think is super valuable to have somebody like that by your side. If you would have asked me for advice, what would I've known, right? I've never
Sure.
run down in the
Yeah.
desert. I would have been useless.
It was, I mean, she had so much knowledge.
Hmm.
Everything from the macro, like this is what you need to be doing from a training perspective. And trust me, I've built training plans for myself. I would never, ever, 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 ever have built that training plan.
Hmm.
I would never have asked myself to work that hard.
Hmm.
I've never run that many miles in my life, right?
Hmm.
I just wouldn't have pushed myself that hard.
Hmm.
So, but also down to the micro stuff of like, what sunglasses did you wear? Right?
Hmm.
All the little
Hmm.
things, so many little details in a race like this. To be able to manage that many miles, it takes a lot of logistical things, but just to keep yourself comfortable as a
Hmm.
runner. So during that training block, I was experimenting with different socks and different like ways of wearing multiple pairs of socks and doing different things to address my feet. Like um, I remember that at the little backyard adventure when I did 40 miles during my training block, one of your amazing races. That was the first time I ever did two socks and Desitin, the diaper cream, on my feet. And I also pre-taped my feet before that race.
If you say two
So
socks, you wore double two pair at once
I
or
did.
switched? Oh
No,
my
I
God.
did. Yes. So what I did was I pre-taped my feet in any known area with Luco tape, if you've ever heard of that, in any known area where I thought there was, I know you normally get a hot spot or a blister here.
Mhm,
So I covered those areas before I even took off. I then completely cover my feet in diaper cream, which is really high in zinc oxide, I think it is. And what it does is just draws out all moisture. It just makes your feet super, super dry.
mhm,
Um, then I was wearing a Injinji liner, so a toe sock that is super, super thin.
mhm,
And then on top of that, I wore a really light dry max sock as another layer. So you're limiting the friction between the shoe and the foot when
mhm.
you have multiple layers of socks like that. So a lot of this I learned from fellow Oli trail runners that have done 200 milers, like, shout out to Kelly and all the other people and Phyllis who gave me advice on this stuff on Facebook groups and things like that. So I did a lot of that experimentation, and at your race at Little Backyard Adventure was the first time I kind of put all the pieces together,
Mhm,
and it was flawless. I had no foot issues at all over 40 miles, and that's not an extraordinarily long way to run, but it was a good enough like testing ground that was where I kind of was solid on like, okay, this is what I'm going to do for my feet at
mhm.
Cocodona.
I mean, this is a piece that you absolutely need to solve and figure out and unlock for these kind of races, for these insanely long races. And I think that's where you have probably advantage because you love gear, you love tinkering, you love figuring things out, right? It's
Yep, yep.
like I get super frustrated with that. I just watched the that Walmsley film that just came out, and
Mm-hmm.
I was just sideswiped again by how meticulous he is in preparation, his
Mm-hmm.
vests and his stuff for his aid station. And I still have sort of this dream that I can just sort of show up and my sheer, you know, presence, will, whatever, just makes me float through it. I understand that things get hard, but I'm not really willing to plan for it. So it's I think that's where you had a big advantage. But Cocodona is more than just figuring out what toe socks work, right? Because one of the really big logistical pieces is that, and I've talked with a few other people around just exactly that Cocodona more or less requires you to have a crew. This is sort of one of
Mm.
those like I don't know. I don't know if somebody could really, I mean, somebody who's perhaps a superstar could do it, right? But really fully doing it by yourself would be extremely hard. And that was a component that, how did you approach that?
Yeah. Well, I do want to give a special shout out to all those people that do it without crew and without pacers at all. I don't know the percentage, but I would venture to say there's probably at least 25% of the runners this
Okay.
year that finished did not have crew or pacers.
Okay. So that's still
Um,
possible. That's good to hear, right?
it's
Because otherwise,
absolutely possible. I would say that for me personally, without my crew and pacers, I can promise you I would not have made it. I would not have finished, and
mhm,
that will be borne out in this story.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
So, I am, just for context, I'm in tech sales is what I do for work, and so I'm always doing like presentations and putting together plans and bringing together teams and all this stuff, right? So, I assembled a team, including my wife, who was going to be my crew chief and have the crew vehicle. And then I had assembled four additional pacers, two of whom were actually coworkers,
mhm,
and two of whom were former either fans or guests on my podcast, Chasing Cutoff. So folks that just kind of piped in and said like, "Hey, I would love to support you if you're going to be out there. Hey, I'm from Flagstaff. I can get you up and over Eldon and different things like that." So
mhm,
um, what we did was I did meticulous planning using some of the really cool. There's some really great resources. If you're going to run Cocodona 250, you got to run the Cocodona 250 runners group. It's a private Facebook group because in there are a bunch of attachments and files that you can use. And one of them is an Excel spreadsheet that has built-in formulas. And so you can tell it your estimated pace from one segment to the next. and how long you plan to rest at the end aid station.
Hmm.
And it will give you all of your projected times from there in terms
Hmm.
of like when you're going to get in, when you're going to get out, if you're going to meet the cutoff, if you're not going to meet the cutoff. So it's very, very helpful tool that I meticulously planned every single aid station, every single like sleeps, every sleep, where I was going to sleep, how I was going to sleep, where my wife was going to meet me, where she wasn't going to meet me, and where I was going to pick up each pacer. And there's this one little thing that I didn't expect. And if you've not done this before, particularly in a point to point 200-mile race, if you're going to have pacers and they're coming out from all over the place, right?
Hmm.
How do you logistically get them either back to their car,
Hmm.
if your crew is continuing forward, how do they get back to their car? Especially if it's like 3 a.m., right? Are you asking them to hitchhike at 3 a.m. to get back to their car? Like this was one of the logistical challenges that took a lot of effort,
Hmm.
more effort than you would imagine to try to figure out, okay, should they park at the end? But then my wife has to go out and meet them and then drive them back to meet
Hmm.
me and get there on time. And will she be there on time? And what about the, this is really, really challenging. So um, for me, I had one crew member with a vehicle and then four pacers that all had like different schedules. Some people had to leave at a certain time, some people could only show up at a certain time. So it took a lot of planning, and we wound up doing two, with about a month in between each of them. We wound up doing two full team calls like you
Hmm.
would do at work, right? Where I've had a full presentation, slide deck. We went over everything, required gear, pacer rules, what they would need to do, what they would not need to do. We went through meticulous planning of exactly what needed to happen. So, as the amazing U.S. heavyweight champion Mike Tyson has famously said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I got punched in the face a few times.
Hmm.
And this plan that I just described, that was meticulously gone over for months and months and months, was completely gone.
Hmm. Hmm. But I want to still say that because in the end, you are here on this call with a buckle in your hand. I do think, like, if you would have told me this over beer, like, 2 months beforehand, and you would have said, I think I'll need all of this stuff, I would have just rolled my eyes in the back and said, I cannot handle this. This seems stupid, right? But as much as your plan all got completely shot, I think there is still a benefit that you got out from it. And in the end, it doesn't fucking matter. You got a buckle. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me tell you what happened first. So the race starts on a Monday, and we are empty nesters. Both of our kids are adults living on their own successfully out in the world. And on the Thursday evening, 9:45 p.m., I got a call from one of those two kids that said that they were experiencing a health emergency.
mhm,
And it was serious and it was scary. And hours went by before we fully understood what was going on. And in one of the like rare instances of medical care, we had a really solid answer by about 1 or 2 a.m. on Friday morning of what had happened and
mhm,
why it had happened and why it wasn't going to happen again.
mhm,
You rarely get that, right? It's usually like, oh, well, we got to get you to a specialist and we're going to do more tests and we're going to figure it out. It's going to take months to figure out what happened. We had a really solid answer. And also for context, my other kid was graduating college on Saturday. So now it's
mhm,
Friday morning. We finally have an answer. So we went in two different directions. I drove out to my kid's college graduation. My wife drove up to the other kid who had been ill, grabbed them. We all converged on the Saturday graduation, so we're all together. I got eyes on my sick kid and realized that they were doing well,
mhm,
to the extent that I'm supposed to fly out with my wife to Arizona from Washington State on Sunday morning,
mhm,
and I didn't make a call till Saturday night
mhm,
if
mhm,
I was even going to do the race or not.
mhm, mhm,
And I'm letting my crew and everybody know, like crew and pacers, like, hey, I may not even come.
mhm, mhm,
But by the end of Saturday evening, we made two decisions. Number one is that I'm going to race,
mhm,
and number two, that my wife is not going to come. just in case.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that was the right call. And I'm glad that that occurred because she was able to stay behind and facilitate some of those follow-up appointments and things like that that needed to happen. Um, but now I don't have a crew.
Which
I've
is
got, yeah.
probably, sorry to interject, but I think you made the right decision, right? You're a parent, and in a sense, the obligation of being a parent is the right voice on your shoulders says, fuck it, I need to pull myself back here. I can't be
Mm-hmm.
selfish, right? I need to
Mm-hmm.
be there for my family this moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as much as your wife not being your crew chief screwed over your plans for your race, it also, the back of your head, gave you that reassurance that you weren't a completely selfish asshole, right? You knew
Yeah.
that there was somebody there who can be
Yes.
there for the family, and if
If
all
so, yeah.
four of you agreed that that was the right thing, then that
Mm-hmm.
in some respects put you at more ease mentally than if you would have had your plan correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I appreciate that. Even on the flight out there, I'm questioning if I'm doing the right thing.
Hmm.
And, I'm expecting in any minute to get a call that things have
Hmm.
gone in the wrong direction and I'm going to turn right around and come back home or whatever. And I'm, of course, fully prepared to do that. But really no reason to do that, no reason to not move forward. And so this is where things go from sort of like the plan changing to something extraordinary happening, which is one of my coworkers, whose name is Angela, who will forever be my hero, who was going to be one of my pacers, um, said, "Hey, this is late Saturday afternoon." She said, "Hey, I'm happy to switch roles. I've got a car. I can be your crew. I won't be able to pace you, but I can be your crew."
Hmm.
And so on my flight out there, 2.5 hours, I write this long Apple note about how to crew. And we meet at the start line, and I get my, start line photos taken, and I do the pre-race check-in, and then we go and hang out that evening and just go over the whole plan. And I knew that Angela was going to be my strongest pacer
Hmm.
because she's an incredible athlete. She's former Team USA ice climber. She is a ski mountaineer racer. She is a ski mountaineer search and rescue person that's been doing it for years and years and years. Super, super, super strong athlete. I did not have any idea what to expect
Hmm.
from a crew perspective because this was not the plan, right?
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
so much fun because I work with her every day, but you just don't work together in this capacity,
Hmm.
right? So I didn't know what to expect, but she was super encouraging and like, I've got this and you're good. And race day comes and it's Monday morning and I'm on the start line. And I really had like those like start line awesome feels. Like I did not feel nervous.
Hmm.
I just felt really grateful because I had been working so hard to get to this
Hmm.
point and things were a little dicey, even as near as like Saturday night
Hmm.
if I was even going to be there. And so I just felt really grateful and really happy. My one little start line faux pas was I had all my lights and the sun was already coming up. So that was not necessary. I didn't need to have all my like headlamp and waist
Hmm.
lamp and stuff like that on. But that's my one little faux pas, but that's fine. So yeah, there I am. And I'm going to start the race. I don't know what to expect from a crew perspective. I know that I'm going to be missing my key pacer who was going to pace three, 17 to 20 mile sections is
Hmm.
no longer there.
Hmm.
But she's going to be there for crew, and I have no idea what
Hmm.
that means at that
Hmm.
point.
Hmm. So you're at that start line. S- Speak a little bit. You spoke about it now in a very logistical thing. You've been talking about Cocodona being sort of a spirit quest. You love the desert. You
Mm,
love being
mhm,
down there. So you've overcome all of these adversaries, all of these logistical challenges. You've prepared meticulously. Sure, you've got the headlamp on, you didn't need to, whatever, right? But you are embarking on this. And you just said you have the start line feel, right? You feel
mm.
like you're supposed to be there. You feel like this is the place for you. I mean, this is amazing, right? This is super cool that you were able to sort of like you explaining all of these challenges, and I'm like, I probably would have just wanted to throw up in a bucket.
Yep, yep. My why for running Cocodona is relatively complex, and it's a whole nother podcast in and of itself. But just through some like really special family connections at a special time in my life when I was growing up with my grandmother specifically, who lived in Tucson, and I did not live in Arizona, but um, she would have me and my older brother come out year over year over year to Arizona, and she just really gave us like the red carpet tour of Arizona, and it was a special time of my life. A really like pivotal point in my life when I'm like 12, 13, 14 years old. This is the first time I've ever been to the Grand Canyon. This is the first time I've ever been to Saguaro National Park. This is the first time I've ever been to Phoenix or Flagstaff or any of these places. So it's very interesting how like you have these childhood experiences that kind of sear this imprint on your soul.
Hmm.
And I would not have been able to articulate it like that years ago, but it's definitely all about like this really special time in my life and the love of this grandparent who really poured herself into me and my brother. Um, and lots more to that story, but that's really, that's why like not Tahoe 200, right? That's why
Hmm.
not Moab 240, right?
Hmm.
That's why when Cocodona was first announced, I just got so entranced and engulfed and like just like obsessed, honestly, with this race because it spoke to me on that level as well as on the level of all the logistics, right? Like, hey, this would be freaking epic if I could do this.
Hmm.
And I think I can do this. I think if I get a coach and if I train that I could beat these cutoffs. I think this is possible. So
Hmm.
here I am. I'm on the start line. I've made it. I'm feeling great. I'm feeling really grateful. I do have a really meticulous plan about how I'm going to get to each aid station and how many hours I'm going to have and when I'm going to sleep and where I'm going to sleep. And the plan is still mostly intact. I just don't have the pacers that I had anymore, and I don't really know how it's all going to unfold. So
Hmm.
I think that probably comes to probably a good point to talk about the second thing that happened out there.
Well, so here's the thing, right? I know how you approached Cocodona these previous years. You had mentioned that you barely got any work done and you were like glued to so
Yeah,
I
haunting the chat in the live stream for hours and hours. Yeah.
I have like number one, I spend very, very little time on YouTube at all. I
Mm,
don't I check in, try to get something, then I'm frustrated because I'm checking in at the wrong time, and everybody who's on screen waffles around because no, there are no visuals and nothing's going on, and so I'm too impatient for the YouTube thing, and so I've never really engaged. I can follow a race, I follow trackers,
mhm,
I do it for UTMB if the right people are out there and stuff, right? And so in general, I get it, but I've never done it for Cocodona, and I wasn't sure how closely I would follow you
mhm,
because I was
mhm,
like, at this point, I didn't even know. I think what probably even drew me to the tracker is because I had heard that you had some issues and potentially wouldn't make it to the start line. I had no idea what it was, and so I was like, well, I guess I'll check the tracker to see if he's even moving because at that point I had no idea, right? And then you're moving. And
yeah,
then you were sort of in a place where I knew you'd be, where you knew you'd be, right? Um, and everything seems all right. And I was like, okay, well, he's off to the races. We'll see what happens. And then mile 20 hit,
yeah, yeah,
and your
exactly.
tracker stopped.
Yeah, and my tracker stopped. Exactly.
I don't know if I fast forwarded it too far,
No, no, that's
but
fine. Yeah.
I
So,
was like, what the hell is going on?
for those who are familiar with this race, I made it through Cottonwood Creek. That's the very first aid station. It's only like 7.5 miles in or whatever. I'm cruising, like I'm way ahead. My estimated time between my estimated time on that entire first like 36.7 miles was a 32-minute mile. And that's simply because this is the hardest part of the race. You're in the Bradshaw Mountains. There's a ton of climbing. In fact, I think the total climb between the start and when you get to Crown King is 14,000 feet.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you have 14,000 feet of climbing and you have almost 37 miles. This is a tough
Hmm.
thing to do for anybody, especially if it's really hot. We were really blessed that it was not super hot. It was probably 80 to 85, and there was actually kind of a cool breeze, which is great. So
It's
I
funny. That's how acclimated you are to this, because you used to, we met, used to meet up for training runs in the Pacific Northwest, and it was like 65, and you're like, oh, it's too
I'm so
hot.
hot. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You calling 80 balmy and good, that means a lot.
For Cocodona, this
Yeah.
was a cool year. Yeah,
Nice. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I had done heat training and stuff along the way as part of my coaching as well, which we don't need to go into that. But so I get to Cottonwood Creek at mile 7.4. I'm way ahead of time. I'm under 30 minutes per mile. And for this kind of climbing, that's good, right? Like
Hmm.
I'm cruising. And my next aid station is Lane Mountain, but that is 25 miles away from Cottonwood Creek. There's nothing in between. There's a single water station, which is manned, and there's some nice people there, but it's just water.
Hmm.
Um, I get to roughly mile 20, and I see on the trail in front of me, you have to keep in mind the pack is spread out. The back of the pack has, even in amongst themselves, is spread out. I think I've got three people behind me. And so I'm fourth from the back, which is fine. I don't care. I'm doing well. I'm feeling
Hmm.
good. Um, so there's three runners behind me and the sweepers. And I see a guy in the shade on the side of the trail. And I'm going to let him tell his own story when it's time. So I'm not going to name him, but I see a person on the side of the trail and he's in the shade on the side of the trail, which is completely normal
Hmm.
for a race like this, right? Um, and there's really no reason, like it's even like kind of a faux pas to like wake someone up when they're laying on the side of the trail, right? But the thing that like struck me as weird was we're only 20 miles in
Hmm.
and it is pretty warm. And so I ran by and kind of going back to my own like search and rescue background, I just had this sense that something wasn't right. And so I just said, "Hey, buddy, are you good?"
Hmm.
Um, and through a series of circumstances that were um, somewhat shocking and dramatic, and that, again, I'm not going to go into because it's his story to tell, but it was very obvious that he wasn't good
Hmm.
and he needed help. And the other major factor was that we're up in the Bradshaws. There's very, very, very spotty cell phone service out there. I was prepared for no cell phone service for the first 37 miles. And he told me that his phone was already dead. So he had no way, even if there was service, he had no way of contacting Race Command to ask for help, and he needed help. He
Hmm.
really did need help.
Hmm.
Um, so I am like going up and down the trail, wandering around, trying to find a signal. And you would get a signal, and it would last for a second, and then it would go away. So it was that bad. But I did manage to get a hold of Race Command, and I described the situation, and they said that help is on the way, but we are asking that you please stay with this runner
Hmm.
until help arrives.
Hmm.
And, I'm in like search and rescue mode basically, right? So I'm happy to stay. And instructions are coming in when I can get a signal about like how to best help this person. And so we're just kind of following those instructions. And after 2 hours, no help had arrived, but the Pacers had arrived.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Race Command said, you can go ahead and leave him
Hmm.
with the Pacers, and they're going to wait for the medics to get
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
So I know other things occurred in his story beyond that, and I'm sure he has things to tell about that. But this is where my part and his part separate.
Hmm.
But one thing I will say is that when we did separate, he shook my hand and he said, "Go get that finish,"
Hmm.
which is meaningful for sure.
Okay.
But I have to say that as I'm leaving him and feeling more comfortable that he's going to be okay, he had certainly recovered a bit, and the Pacers were with him, and I knew he was taken care of. It's so funny how your brain works because my brain went immediately. to the Strava title of my activity, which was over before it really began.
Okay.
That's where
Okay.
my head, that's where
Yeah.
my head at
I
that
mean,
point.
that's what it looked like, right? I mean, that's when
Hmm.
I started following. I looked at your tracker and your tracker wasn't moving, right? There was like your average pace and then it dropped and it was like 20 miles in. I was like, Ben has trained so hard. It can't be that he gave up after 20 miles, right? I mean,
Right.
this,
Yeah.
this is absolutely that something was going on. And, trackers are spotty, right? I mean, you
Hmm.
ask yourself every possible question, right? And
Hmm.
then eventually you were moving, but I was like, this how can you recover from 2 hours seemingly sitting around in one spot
Yeah.
when you were already um flirting with cutoff for the entire race, right?
Yeah, yeah. To be honest, I wasn't going to be flirting with cutoffs for the entire race. If I executed as I should have, I would have always been anywhere between 1 and 3 hours ahead,
Hmm.
including getting some sleep.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there was a plan to both get sleep and beat cutoffs. But now I'm in this place where I've got about 20 miles to go. Everyone who is in the race is 2 hours ahead of me, and I start to just have a lot of negative internal talk at that point. And really the what it came down to was you're gonna if you can finish this race, you will never see another soul.
Hmm.
You are lucky if the aid stations are even there, let alone if they have anything other than pickle juice for you, because you're going to be the last one through, and they're not even expecting you. Maybe they don't even know you're still out here. Maybe they will have packed up and gone, right?
Hmm.
So like you're having a lot of these like doom kind of
Hmm.
thoughts and conversations with yourself. Um, but I was able to dig myself out of that hole and say, you know what? Like I'm living my dream right now. This is my dream. And I'm good at nothing if I'm not good at chasing cutoffs, right? This is what I've done my entire trail running life. And I'm going to get to Lane Mountain before the cutoff.
Hmm.
That's it. I'm just going to get to Lane Mountain before the cutoff. And so I just start leaning in and running. And sure enough, I saw no one, right? And now it's 11 p.m. when I get to Lane Mountain. They have every single thing that they had for every other runner is still there for me. And they're wonderful people and they're so excited to see me. There is another runner there and he is dropping from
Hmm.
the race. Um, Shout out to him. But they were just so encouraging and so kind, and they lacked nothing from an aid station perspective. And this really kind of raised my spirits. I was like, okay, maybe this is possible.
Hmm.
And I got out of there with probably 10 minutes to spare on the cutoff, and I headed down to Crown King, which again is mile 36.7 in the race. It's a very like iconic part of the race. It's so funny if you've watched the live stream or the highlights of this race and you know about Crown King. It's just like has an old-timey saloon. There's hardly any buildings there. It's just this really, really old mining town up in the top of the mountains. Very difficult to reach by car, let alone on foot. Um, and all of the footage that you see or sort of like remember from over the years is sort of like midday,
Hmm.
but it's midnight.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I roll in at midnight. There is another runner there. He's
Hmm.
packing up. He's already done all of his stuff. He's eaten. He's taking care of his feet and stuff. And I come in. There's one drop bag left. It is my drop bag.
Hmm.
And again, they lacked for nothing at this aid station. There was tons of people there that were just all they wanted to do was help me.
Hmm.
And this was my first sock change,
Hmm.
reapplying, cleaning my feet, reapplying the diaper cream to my feet, changing my socks, switching, doing a drop bag thing by myself, and got out of there with probably 3 minutes
Hmm.
to spare out of Crown King, and heading my way to the series of next three aid stations, which um, I hit this place called Arasta Creek at mile 52.4 was the next one. But that night I ran 100% completely solo.
Hmm.
I did not see another soul. And the guy who had departed before me from uh, from Whiskey Row, or not, forgive me, not Whiskey Row, but rather Crown King. Um, I actually eventually passed him. So that's the one person I saw.
Hmm.
I wound up passing him. He was struggling. And so other than just like, oh, cool, are you a good guy? Other than that, I didn't see anybody. And this is the very first time I've stayed up all night. Because just for context,
I was
yeah,
just going to say, yeah, right? I mean, you did lots of training, but not specific night training. And so
no,
you've never run through an entire night
no,
until that night.
until this point, yeah. And so even on the very first night, which I'm sleeping zero, no sleep,
Hmm.
no naps, no nothing, because I'm really, really, really pushing the pace here. Even that first night, I start having hallucinations, which is
Hmm.
crazy.
Hmm.
Um, so for me, the hallucinations were really strong in the first half of the race, and they tapered off over time because it was almost like a trying to get a hold of my brain, like to convince myself that what I was seeing was not real. But that was a challenging night, just being out there by yourself, and Cocodona is filled with epic features, epic climbs, epic areas, epic views, epic, 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 epic. In between the epics, there are miles and miles and miles of non-epic stuff, right? Where you're just crushing this trail or this fire road or this double track or this single track, right? So that's what that night felt like. Obviously, it's pitch dark. I don't know if there's a good view or not, right? But
Hmm.
I'm just going and going and going. I get into this Arasta Creek aid station at God knows what time, 3 in the morning or something like that. Again, they're just like wonderful people. They help me get out. I'm out within 5 to 10 minutes of the cutoff. Sun's coming up. It's my first sunrise out
Magical,
there. Yeah,
magical.
my first sunrise of six, which is crazy to say. Yeah. Um, I had 5 sunsets and 6 sunrises. So, um, and I get into this place called Camp Kippa, and this is where, um, oh, and I do need to reverse back just a little bit. When I left Crown King Aid Station at night, I got lost. This is the first time I got lost in the race.
Yes, I noticed that
Yeah.
on the tracker.
I would like to say that the course was very well marked for the majority of the 250 miles. Could have been better marked leaving Crown King in the dark. There's a million private side roads,
Hmm.
and only one right way to go, and there's tons of turns getting out of there. So I probably lost about a half an hour. It was very frustrating. I was by myself. Anyway, that was kind of the start of that night. But now the sun is rising, and I'm rolling into this place called Camp Kippa. I know that when I get there, I'm probably going to get my first 10 to 20 minutes of sleep.
Hmm.
That's how far ahead of the cutoff I am.
Hmm.
I might get there and have like 45 minutes, which is like a miracle, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I get in there, I slam down some food, I do all the necessary stuff, and the necessary stuff, my friends, has to be done. So like don't forget about the fact that you still have to go to the bathroom, you still have to reapply lube, you still have to do all the things. You have to transition from those night clothes because it's very cold
Hmm.
to stripping all that off, repacking all of that, putting on sunscreen, putting on your day like
Hmm.
sun hat
Hmm.
and all that stuff, putting on your sunglasses. Like you have to do that over and over and over and often by yourself. So I get into Camp Kippa, I slam some food, I do sleep. This is my first sleep. It is the early afternoon on Tuesday, and I set an alarm for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or something like that, and I got a little bit of fitful sleep. And I left Camp Kippa knowing that not the next aid station, but the one after that, at mile 78 at Whiskey Row in downtown Prescott, that I was going to see my crew for the first time and I
Hmm.
was going to get a pickup at Pacer.
Hmm.
And it filled me as I'm leaving Camp Kippa with so much adrenaline that I flew. I don't know. It felt like a 7:30 pace. It was probably a 17:30 pace, but I flew down this hill and I just went on and on and on. I'm like, I love this hill. This is so perfect downhill, right? I'm just going and going and going. I do not have cell phone service, so I did not get the text from Race Command that said you are off course. Um, Eventually, I pull out my phone just to check, just to see,
Hmm.
make sure I'm on course. I am way off course.
That's the one I saw.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah. There
not
was one
only
section where you were
it was
off.
bad, it was
Yeah,
really bad.
yeah. Because when you said the first one, 20 minutes, I was like, no, this looked like two and a
This is
half
a long
miles or
time.
something like that,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So not only do I have to turn around,
And go
but I have
uphill.
to climb back up the hill.
Hmm.
It was so demoralizing.
Oh my gosh.
And I missed a major right-hand turn. I should have turned right. But as I'm approaching that turn, which is now a left-hand turn,
Hmm.
the markings are gone because the
Hmm.
sweeps are ahead of me because they don't realize I took a wrong turn and they're
Hmm.
taking all the markings.
Oh,
So
fuck.
I miss the turn again. Not by far, because now I have service. My phone rings and I'm like, you missed a major turn. Here's where you missed a major turn. Race Command, by the way, was amazing. Anytime you got off course, they would text you. You didn't always have service. Sometimes you were in airplane mode, but they would always text you and say that you're off course.
Wow.
Um, so they said, we told the Pacers to stop, or forgive me, the sweeps. We told the
Hmm.
sweeps to stop. They're about a mile ahead of you. You're going to have to navigate with your phone because the course markings are gone. Just a few turns. I caught up to them and I'm feeling pretty down
Hmm.
because of that huge loss of time and energy, just frankly, just
Hmm.
energy, just climbing.
Hmm.
And when you have adrenaline and you pour it
Hmm.
all out and you're all
Hmm.
excited and then it all crushes down on you, you're like, oh my God, what have I done? So I know I need to get to this place first called Camp Wamatochik, and I do eventually roll in there. I have no time because I have lost about 45 minutes that
Hmm.
I left Camp Kippa with plenty of time. I've lost 45 minutes in getting lost. I now have about 8 miles total of bonus miles on my watch.
Hmm.
Um, and I get to Wamatochik. That's at mile 70 or so. And I only have 8 more miles to go to see my crew. And that is, that's probably like where the next good stopping point is. So I roll into town. Um, as you're coming into Prescott, there's a really large, significant. Like if it was in our town, we would think this was like the greatest park of all time. I don't know if it's a state park or what it was, but very, very huge trail system and really, really beautiful out there. And probably the most significant hallucination that I had was I was out there and I'm running on the trails and I'm going and going and going. Um, and I come around a corner and I see um, a ton of like RVs and people and campfires and people like setting up camp because the sun's starting to come down. And I was like, oh my God, that looks so nice. I'm so jealous. I totally want to be camping right now. Yeah, no, none of it. None of it existed. It was just rocks and trees. Just rocks and trees. But I was convinced that I saw like this big, beautiful campsite with different tents and different RVs and people setting up, and I saw the smoke going up and stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's probably the last like um hardcore hallucination that I had because I started getting frustrated with my own brain. Like you have to distinguish reality from not reality because I also saw people on the trail like with their dogs and I started to question like was that real, right? Like
Hmm.
I don't know.
Hmm.
Um So I roll into Prescott and there are my two coworkers at Whiskey Row. And you have to put this into context. Like, you know, these are my closest, two of my closest friends at work.
Hmm.
But there's always that weird like dynamic, right?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
at work. Yes, I work with them every day. Yes, we talk
Hmm.
every day. Yes, we text even outside of work, right? We call each other and text each other and connect, especially my buddy Cordell who was there to pace me. But this is the first time I've ever seen Angela at an aid station, my new crew member. And I roll in. I've got about 45 minutes. They sit me in a chair. They hand me some pizza. And um, oh God, it's hard to even talk about. Like, you don't know like what like friendship is until your coworkers are taking your shoes off
Hmm.
and cleaning your feet
Hmm.
and making sure you don't have blisters and laying out everything for you. Like you just don't it creates a whole new paradigm. Like this whole
Hmm.
wall fell down right there, right? Of like I had kind of like inspected them. I was hoping that they would help me with my feet, as in like I would sit there and do my feet and be like, "Can you hand me this? Can you hand me
Mm,
that?" Right?
mhm,
But Angela knew instinctively that I had not slept, and that I'm rolling into this aid station on virtually no sleep. It's now late Tuesday night, and her objective was to get me into the sleep station for 30 minutes and get me out on time. That was the only objective.
mhm,
And so she just leaned in and went into action, and I was not allowed to protest when my coworkers are cleaning my feet and helping me. I was not, I was just like put into this. A bunch of food was put in my belly. I think it was Freak Brothers pizza. Shout out Freak Brothers. And then I got put in this bed. A timer was set. About 12 seconds later, they came back and said, "Okay, that's 30 minutes," and that's what it felt like. I get up and I leave Whiskey Row with my buddy Cordell. It's now mile 78. Granted, I've never run this far in my life, right?
mhm,
And it should be said that at that point, my feet were in fantastic condition. No blisters, no hot spots, no issues. So the plan is working. The double socks, the diaper cream, it's all working really, really well. I just needed my feet cleaned and I needed fresh socks. I left that aid station, that Whiskey Row aid station, with my original pair of shoes on. But after putting them on, I knew that was probably going to be the last aid station that I leave with those shoes.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, we go out into the night, and hindsight's 2020 when you hear all the stories from other people. But this is the section that it's three major different things that you go through to get from Whiskey Row through Iron King and into Fain Ranch. Fain Ranch is like a very major aid station. Um, the Satisfy Fain Ranch, right? That's the one that
mhm,
they
mhm,
sponsor. It's got all these cushy couches and stuff, but you have to go through three distinct sections. So the first is several miles through town, all up like straight uphill. The second section is through what they call the Granite Dells along Watson Lake, which is in Prescott. It's like one of their most scenic features. There's a beautiful park, it's a beautiful lake, and the granite features there, if you haven't seen them, are really, really cool. But they're hard to navigate.
mhm,
They're hard to get through because they're just really like awkward and steep. It's just like boulder scrambling essentially for
mhm,
several miles.
mhm,
The markers on the trail are just like white dots on the rock. So
mhm,
you just follow the dots. Um, Once we got through the Granite Dells, and this is again hindsight's 2020, I didn't know about this, but this is the section where String Bean got turned around,
mhm,
and where, if I'm not mistaken, Jeff Browning, who I think was second in the race in his race, sees String Bean coming toward him and is like,
mhm,
"Oh, bro, you are going the wrong way." So this is not an easy place to navigate
mhm,
if even someone who has won this race can get turned around there. So my pacer Cordell, my coworker, did an amazing job. He's an amazing dude, and he just told great stories, and we just laughed all night long. We get through that section, and then the final section is an open cow pasture with no trail, just flags. And dude, this guy is like the greatest navigator. We didn't miss a single flag. We get to Fain Ranch. The sun is coming up. We're now at mile 96. Like, I can't even imagine that, right? I've never run this far in my life, but I'm at mile 96 somehow.
I mean, this is where I
Yeah.
sort of started to completely, like, my brain started exploding, where I started texting Scott and I was like, yeah, you were so, I mean, I not knowing the story at all, right? But you
Mm,
were so far behind. You looked like you were in an impossible scenario.
hmm
And so I was sort of just watching your tracker saying, okay, how long are you going to last, right? Are you going to
hmm
make it to what aid station are you end up going to drop? And when I tried to play in the scenarios through in my head of like, how do you spin this? Because I've been in these places, right? Where you're
hmm
like, well, maybe you can at least go the furthest you've ever gone, or maybe you can at least, right? I mean, I was sort of trying to like tell your story, right? And you just kept going, and then you made it over 100K, and you made it over 75 miles, which was my furthest distance that I've ever ran. And I'm like, you are unbelievable. You're incredible. I can't believe after this crazy start, you got yourself to this place. And then the second night, and you're approaching 100 miles. I mean, that's when I totally started getting sucked into this and completely like, well, shit, now my week's
Yeah,
completely shot following the
yeah.
tracker.
And so I'm going to tell you a really important detail right now that I don't think I told Angela about until this moment. Again, Angela, amazing crew chief, like kept all the pacers in line, kept everyone on schedule. And there's a lot more to that story that I'll share with you. But and it tracks that I didn't remember this until right now because I didn't remember it until then when I told her because I was so sleep deprived. But a very important detail is that between Camp Kippa, mile 62, and Camp Wamachochik, mile 69, solo running, late in the afternoon, it's Tuesday, I got a text from RD, Steve Adderholt, former guest on Singletrack. Shout out, Steve, amazing dude. And he said, hey, no pressure, but when you get a second, call me.
Mhm,
And I had a second. It turns
mhm,
out I had plenty of time. So I called him and he said, hey, we want to acknowledge and thank you for what you did for your fellow runner back on day one. And we've been talking about your situation. And I do not want you to give me any kind of answer right now. This is not a yes, no. This is not a I need an answer from you. There is no pressure at all. But I just want you to know that, like, my desire is for you to keep doing what you're doing.
mhm,
Just keep chasing those cutoffs, keep beating the cutoffs. You're doing an amazing job. That's what I want you to do.
mhm,
But sleep is going to catch up with you at some point.
mhm, mhm,
And that's how that's how this works.
mhm,
So there's going to come a point where you may need to play a card. And that card is that I'm going to transport you forward in the race. I'm going to take you from the aid station you finished at, and I'm going to zoom you up to the next aid station, and I'm going to give you the gift of sleep, which you were denied because you were delayed for those hours.
mhm, mhm,
And in that moment, I was like, I do not want this. Like,
mhm,
thank you for the offer. I'm going to keep crushing. I'm
mhm,
feeling great. I'm going to keep going. Um, and he's like, don't make a decision.
mhm,
It's not, I don't need to hear a yes or no right now. I just want you to know it's out there. So I'm telling Angela this at Fain Ranch, right? At mile 96 before she throws me down into this, mattress to go to sleep because I'm in there with about an hour. I've
mhm,
got about an hour until the cutoff. So I've made up a lot of time by
mhm,
mile 96.
mhm,
And that means that I'm going to get food, I'm going to get my feet worked on, and I'm going to get 40 minutes of sleep.
mhm,
So this is now my longest sleep, and it is Wednesday morning.
mhm,
And I get a solid 40 minutes, with the exception that I was so freaking cold. I was not just shaking, I was like convulsing. So they
mhm,
eventually put like 3 or 4 blankets on top of me, which I
mhm,
needed. There's something about my body. It was just like freaking out. I was so,
mhm,
so cold up there.
mhm,
Um, I wake up. She gets me out on time. We probably leave with 5 minutes to spare. Like she is like clockwork. She knows exactly what to do and when to do it and when to wake me and when to feed me and all that stuff. This is like one of the most unbelievable experiences I've ever had. And I leave with the pacer, and this is one of the first moves that she made in collaboration with everyone else because there's two text chains going on, right? There's the text chain where I'm being encouraged by my coach and my wife and my team. There's a separate text chain that I'm not included in, right? That's just the crew and the pacers where they're collaborating on the logistics
okay,
uh, of
okay,
um, of hey, we've decided that Mike Snyder Moose, who's been on the Chasing Cutoffs podcast before as a guest, we've decided to move him forward in the race. He was not going to pick up Ben till later, but we want him here now. And so rather than him doing these two sections, we're going to pull him forward. He's going to do these two sections. So Mike and I took on the Mingus Mountain climb from mile 96 to mile 108 when you get to the top of Mingus Mountain. And then we took on the descent to Jerome, which gets you to mile 125. So I would not have made it up that climb without Mike. He was incredibly encouraging to get me up that mountain because it is a very, very, very steep climb. You've got, it feels like you've got 10,000 feet to climb. It's probably closer to 2,000 feet, but at mile, 110 to
Mhm.
125,
Mhm.
it feels crazy.
Mhm.
Um, and it was very steep, like in certain sections. So he got me up the mountain. I get into the Mingus Mountain camp aid station. I have 15 minutes. There's no time to sleep. So I've got 15 minutes and I get the greatest um, ground beef slash red sauce lasagna of all time. I'm just chowing down, right?
Mhm.
I'm hot because it's midday and I just did a big climb. And so they throw an ice bandana around my neck. Again, the feet. The feet are cleaned, the socks are changed, the Desitin's applied. Thank God for rubber gloves because I don't think Angela would ever got the smell of Desitin off her hands if not for that. But um, everything is done, and we get out of there with 5 minutes to spare, and we're now on our way to Jerome
Mhm.
at mile 125. So it's interesting the way that the narrative around Cocodona has changed from people that have run it. So if you listen to the various podcasts or read the Facebook page or various blogs or whatever, for years it was always the hardest part of this race is the first 50K.
Mhm.
It's come to be known that, let's just say, the most demoralizing part of the race is the descent from Mingus to Jerome.
Mhm.
Um, because it is 17 miles,
Yeah.
because it is very, very steep, and
Mhm.
because it is incredibly rocky,
Mhm.
and you can't get a rhythm, and you can't get a run going at all,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, and you're constantly on rollers and baby heads, as we would call them around
Mhm.
here, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I knew that going in. I had mentally prepared for that, and it wasn't as hard as I thought it might be. And it's all switchbacks. And at one stage, off to my right, like on the edge of the cliff, essentially, I see another runner, and they're on the hillside. And she's trying to find like a giant like palm frond or a long stick or something. And she's like, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're here. There is a huge snake on the trail and it will not move. And we have been here a long time."
Oh my gosh.
So I was really grateful for Mike in that moment, who is a Phoenix native, who grabbed his pole and effectively just flicked the snake off the trail. I have since learned I think it was a king snake, which I don't think is venomous, but it was over 5 feet long and it was freaking massive and it was very angry that we kicked it off the trail. So that was my like most major like wildlife sighting. So we're continuing down, and I've passed that runner, and I passed another and another and another,
Mhm.
and we get to this guy who I don't know his name, but he's distraught because
Mhm.
he's like, "We have 4 hours and X miles to get to Jerome, and I'm not going to make it." And everyone that I passed had given up. They
Mhm.
all knew they weren't making it to Jerome. Um, So I just turned to Mike and I said, at this point, my watch is still working. Spoiler alert. I turned to Mike and I said, "What is the minutes per mile?" Because I cannot do any math. I
Yeah.
can't think for
Yeah.
myself. I said, "From this point to Jerome, how many minutes per mile do I need to run to make the cutoff?" And he's
Mhm.
like, 24.
Mhm.
Great.
Mhm.
So, rollers and baby heads be damned. I took off, right? And I'm running my ass off down this hill. And I'm running and I'm running and I'm running and I turn around and I have dropped my pacer.
Yeah. Amazing.
It turns out that Mingus like really kicked his ass, like the climb.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so I very graciously said in the text, I said, "Hey, Mike and I got separated.
Mhm.
Can you guys please remind me, because it may have been 5 minutes ago, but I can no longer remember. Can you tell me how fast I need to go?" And someone said 22 minutes per mile.
Mhm.
So I am freaking booking it. And if you know anything about this section, the baby heads and the rollers finally end, and you get out into a dirt road that goes on for miles and miles and miles, but it is downhill and you can really start to pick up the pace. And then you get onto a paved road for miles, it feels like. And this town of Jerome is again, another historic mining town. And it's almost like an Italian village in the sense that it's built on tiers that go down, 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 down
Mm-hmm.
that down a hillside, and it just weaves and weaves and weaves and weaves. Well, the aid station seemingly is at the bottom of like tier 7 or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Like you think you're there and you are not there. So um, I finally get there, and not only is Angela there, but she has arranged for another one of my pacers named Brian Booth. Shout out Brian, who was not supposed to be there till close to the end. He is now there. Um, my boss has shown up, who lives in Arizona, which is amazing. I did not expect to see her. I think there was some conversation where like, "Hey, are you cool if your boss comes?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine." Um, I think initially she thought she was going to a road marathon because she had like signs, right? Like it was so
Oh,
sweet. Yeah, it
oh,
was so sweet. She
yes,
created
yes.
like custom signs that said
Mm-hmm.
like, toenails are for losers or whatever you would
Yeah,
see at a
yeah.
road marathon. Um, and it was very, very sweet. She brought all this ice cream. She was just like, but when she saw me come in, and I think obviously she had been there at Jerome for a bit, and saw like the reality of what was going on there, I think like her mindset shifted, and she was like, "Oh, this is what this is. This is not what I expected." Um, and so she was all helpful in the aid station. I only had 15 minutes, right? Spoiler alert, like it never ends, right? I got no
Mm-hmm.
sleep at Jerome. I have 15 minutes. Weird little fact about Jerome is like it's not that you have to leave the aid station on a certain time. You have to go down this road and get out of a gate at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we had to even leave like 5 minutes for that. So I was in the chair for 10 minutes. But I pick up Brian Booth at that point at Jerome, which is now mile 125. The sun's going down. It is getting dark. It is the third night. It
Mm-hmm.
must be Wednesday night by now.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian is so interesting because I had the chance to go back and read the logistics text thread that I wasn't included on initially, right? And he was very vocal in logistics text thread because he's done this race twice.
Okay.
He DNF'd in 2022 and he finished in 2023. He's got a lot of experience. He's a Flagstaff native. He knows this race.
Mm-hmm.
Very vocal in the text thread. When we got on the trail, like, unless I engaged him, he was very silent. And I didn't have a lot to say, but
Yeah.
he was just this like bobbing headlamp out in front of me, like this
Mm-hmm.
little sprite that I just
Nice.
followed.
Nice.
And it's so weird. There's like this one weird descent leaving Jerome that there's only one way to connect the city of like, God, is it called Cottonwood or something like that to Jerome? And it's through private property. And it's extremely steep down, and it's like a junkyard, so it's like full of like metal shrapnel and glass and stuff like that. It's literally the worst part of the entire course. I believe Steve Adderholt just described it as pure bullshit, basically. But it's like the only connector. This
Yeah.
is how it is, right? When you're in RD, so it's like the only connector to connect the two. So um, we get through that. It's a pretty like nondescript section because it is dark and
Mm-hmm.
I am tired, and I think I got a few like 10-minute naps in there, and it wasn't until after the race I found out, but there was a lot of 10-minute naps that were 5-minute naps because I
Mm-hmm.
was pushing cutoffs, and they would wake me up after 5 minutes and tell me it was 10 minutes because they knew I wasn't going to make it if I didn't
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
um, and so we get into this next aid station, which is called Dead Horse Ranch, and it's mile 135. It is maybe 2:33 in the morning. And one of the most surprising things to me was my boss was there at
Mm-hmm.
2 in the morning
Mm-hmm.
because again, she had shifted into another mode. Was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I get it now. Like I
Mm-hmm.
see what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
And so between my boss and Angela and Brian and his girlfriend, Ty, they worked out a way that my boss was going to shuttle cars in the middle of the night, in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of nowhere, so that Angela could pace me.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought Angela wasn't going to get to pace me. So Angela was going to pace me from Dead Horse to Deer Pass, but in between, there was a solid 40-minute nap during which I'm sound asleep and my feet are being completely taken care of while I'm sleeping, right? They get me in a chair, they feed me. You see how this is going, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This was you got 1 minute to get out of this aid station deal
Mm-hmm.
after, but I did get 40 minutes
Mm-hmm.
of sleep at that point. And so Angela and I run from Dead Horse to Deer Pass is about 13 miles, and this is probably one of the tightest cutoff scenarios that we were in for the entire race, because this is when the dream was still alive, and this is when I was still pushing. If you've ever done this section from Dead Horse to Deer Pass, I understand that in the daylight it's very pretty.
Mm-hmm.
At night it is not pretty. So you don't see anything except
Mm-hmm.
for like a sandy trail
Mm-hmm.
with not a lot of rocks, which is nice, but it's sandy. Um, and then every half mile you would descend into a wash and then ascend out of it, and just repeat that 4,000 times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So she was really pushing me. Angela was really pushing me. This is the first time she's paced me. I'm just glad she's out there and that I'm not out there on my own, because I know that I can't do it on my own. And she's like, every time we hit any kind of downhill at all, she's like, you have to run. You have to run.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting into this like ultra shuffle mode. I'm running downhill when I can. We come across another runner who he'll go nameless, but it was absolutely hilarious because he was like a business owner and he's like on the phone at 3 in the morning, like doing some kind of business deal. This is very bizarre. Um, but we pass him, and I'm like, Angela, I have to sleep. I have to have 10 minutes. She's like, no problem. Go
Mm-hmm.
ahead, lay down.
Mm-hmm.
She did one of the cool things that I hadn't done prior, which was she took her pack off, and that was my pillow. And she's like, leave your pack on. Don't take your pack off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I left my pack on. I used hers as a pillow. I covered myself with a blanket. I'm like, set a timer for 10 minutes. No problem. 5 minutes later, she wakes me up. Right? I don't know it's 5 minutes
Yeah.
later, but she knows we are pushing the cutoff really
Mm-hmm.
bad. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We get into the aid station. I've got 8 minutes. She hasn't slept all night. She's gonna get back to her car. Like through the miracles of her own logistical planning, her car is there. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how she did this. It's just all the shuffling of all the people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Solo. She just made this happen. Her car is there. And I'm going to take off from Dead Horse, or forgive me, from Deer Pass, and I'm going to go to Sedona on my own, and the sun is up,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got 8 minutes, and I'm pushing down food. Um, but I don't have time to do feet at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other things I needed to do because I'm still in like puffy coat, warm hat, all that stuff. I needed to go to the bathroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have time, so I have
Mm-hmm.
to leave. So I get out onto the trail and I do the responsible thing. And I had a little trowel and I dug a 6-inch hole and I did my business. And then I changed out of my warm clothes and I got into my sun stuff and I got my sunglasses on and then I put on my sunscreen and then I realized I had to sleep. And so I set it to, I'm by myself, right? I set a timer for 10 minutes. I wake up 10 minutes later, I get up and I keep moving. And somewhere in all of this, with all this sleep deprivation, so I don't know if you do the math here, but it's probably about 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
It's Thursday morning and I've slept
Mm-hmm.
about 3 hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I convinced myself that between going to the restroom, changing my clothes, and taking a 10-minute nap, that I've lost an hour. That's what my mentality is.
Yeah.
You just lost 50 minutes to an hour, something like that. And this is going to be, you're on your own. My watch is dead.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what pace I'm going. I cannot remember what that guy said in terms of how many miles it is to the next aid station. It was 17, but I cannot remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of go into panic mode at this point, and I start running way too fast,
Mm-hmm.
way too hard. And you climb this insane, weird mountain. I cannot remember the name of this mountain, but it's very, very odd. It looked like nothing else on the entire course. And on this climb, I passed about 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
I am crushing. I am pushing so freaking hard. And I get to the top of the climb, and my body says, okay, you're good. We're done. Have a good nap. You will not take another step forward.
Oh.
And I took a 10-minute nap and I got up and I started to walk. And no, you got to take another 10-minute nap. Take another 10-minute nap. Everybody passes me. All those people that I
Mm-hmm.
passed me. I've pushed way too hard.
Mm-hmm.
I did not pace myself because I was panicking because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know how many miles I have to go. Um, I'm getting into up and over that mountain and down into the red rock of Sedona. I don't know if I have 12 miles or if I have 2 miles. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
My phone is almost dead, and I forgot my charging cable. I had a battery,
Mm-hmm.
but
No.
I don't have a charging cable. I'm afraid to use my phone. I'm afraid to take it off airplane mode, and I do take it off airplane mode, and I call my wife, and I just break into sobs. I am bawling my eyes out. And I said, "It's over.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot do this anymore. My body will not allow me to move. It is forcing me to sleep."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, call Angela, because I didn't want to call her. Because I was, again, the phone, the
Mm-hmm.
sleep, I'm not making rational decisions. I said, call Angela and let her know that I'm going to lay down. And I don't know if I'm going to be here for 2 hours or 3 hours or what it's going to be, but I cannot physically go on without sleeping. I'm bawling. She's bawling. My race is over. I have DNF'd. I'm not going to make it to Sedona.
Mm-hmm.
I lay under a tree, and I do want to give a shout out to all the sweepers that volunteer at this race. They're incredibly respectful
Mm-hmm.
because when you're last, they hang way back, and if they see you lay down, they don't bug you. They just hang way back, right? You can't. They're chatting, but you can't hear them. They're
Mm-hmm.
far away, right? I get a text from my coach. She's like, "Point your poles in the direction that you want to go because you don't want to be disoriented when you wake up." I go to sleep. I'm asleep for no more than 5 minutes when out of the woods, who should appear but Angela,
Mm-hmm.
my crew chief slash pacer. And she said, the first thing she said is, "Do you need some alone time?" Because there's like snot and blood and like everything, like it's bad, right? And I said, "No, it's okay." And she said, "I think you're going to be surprised how close you are." And I'm like, "How did you even find me?" I'm asking the search and rescue person, "How did you find me?" She's like,
Yeah.
"I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at finding people." So she's like, "Let's just walk."
Mm-hmm.
She said, "I think you're going to be surprised. I actually think you can make it before the cutoff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you just walk."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "I think you're insane. I think we got 20 miles to go, but okay." We had like 2 miles to go at this point. And so we walk and we break out of the woods and we get into town. And now we're on the streets of Sedona. And it's obvious to me and it's obvious to her that I'm gonna get there, but I'm not gonna get out in time. I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
get there at
Mm-hmm.
the cutoff. She's like, I
Yeah.
think you're gonna feel proud
Mm-hmm.
just to get there by the time. So let's keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we'd hit a stoplight, I would try to sit down. She would not allow me to sit down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just things like that. And I said, Angela, um, I want you to call Steve
Mm-hmm.
and tell him my situation.
Mm-hmm.
She calls Steve. He's like, don't give him any choices. You're going to get to Sedona. You're going to get in a car and you're going to drive to Munns Park. So technically speaking, there's an aid station called Schneebly Hill in between, and then there's Munns Park. But everyone knows, especially if you're back at the Packer, that if you can get to Munns Park, you're good because beyond that point, the cutoffs are really, really generous.
Mm-hmm.
They're only super tight at the beginning, and if you can
Mm-hmm.
get to Munns, you're good. And I've DNF'd. Like, there's no difference to me. I'm like, fine. I don't care if I sleep at Sedona or if I sleep at Munns Park. You drive me to Munns Park. I don't care. I'm not thinking. I get up there. I talk to my wife again, and I'm like, yeah, you should see my feet. They're really, really bad. And I'm eating like eggs and bacon and pancakes. I'm starting to feel a little bit better. I saw at the aid station volunteering there, Sonia Glover. Shout out Sonia, who is someone who I think was like the second guest I ever had on my podcast. She's volunteering there. Her buddy Danielle is there. Lots of hugs, some selfies, some fangirling, which is really fun. Their words, not mine, which is really really fun to be around. And I go inside, and for the first time, I get my feet worked on by an EMT,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a lot of blisters, and they're all underneath my toenails.
Mm-hmm.
So that is not from friction. That is from kicking rocks
Mm-hmm.
over and over and over. They dress everything. I get in bed. I sleep about 2 hours. And What I don't know is that this is a false choice. I still think I have a choice, right?
Mhm.
There's conversations happening between Steve and Angela via text that are like, give him 3 hours, kick his ass out. I want to see him at Heritage Square.
Oh my gosh.
That's happening. I don't know that's happening. But Steve is like orchestrating this thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I wake up after 2 hours. I'm cleaned up. This is the first time I've done like full like wipes to clean my whole body. It's the first time I've changed my clothes. It's the first time I've had my feet worked on. It's the first time I've slept more than an hour. I wake up after 2 hours. I still think I have a choice, and I called you because having known you as long as I have, having known you as a friend and a race director and a running friend, just to be really frank, like I knew that if missing those 27 miles, which on the course, that's what I missed. Now, granted, I've done like 10 bonus miles, so I don't really count it that much, but from getting lost. But missing those 27 miles, like I knew if anyone was going to tell me the truth that this was not a legitimate finish and it was okay to DNF and just come back next year, the quote unquote truth. If anyone was going to tell me that, I knew you would be honest with me, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't want to be coddled, and I didn't want to be told like, "Oh, it's okay, like it's still a finish, you're fine." And then everyone in the background going like, "Yeah, that guy didn't run 250 miles. Like, what is
Mhm.
he doing?" Right?
Mhm.
You were the only person that I wanted to talk to at that moment. And I was somewhat lucid after having slept for 2 hours. I don't know. What do you remember about that phone call?
I mean, it was really weird because I was in a really crazy logistical running errands time where I really didn't. I mean, I work from home. I'm in front of Zoom calls and microphones and the ability to put AirPods in and really be concentrated and be present for phone calls pretty much all day long. And that was the one time where I'm in the car driving errands and you called. And so I felt like totally stupid that I felt like I couldn't dedicate everything to this moment when
Mm-hmm.
I usually can. And I felt like you were very coherent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I did not get a sense that you were completely distraught and completely out of it. And you just wanted my opinion
Mm-hmm.
on what you should do. And I felt honored to get the backstory and the trust of the call, but I also felt super relieved that
Mm-hmm.
I was able to help you make a decision. Seemingly, apparently, the decision was already made, but
Mm-hmm.
help you process this by having all of the pieces that I wasn't like, well, I don't really know what's going on, right?
Right. Yeah.
You told me exactly what was going on, and I was like, okay, based on all of this, and based on the fact that we can't sit here and ponder for 3 hours, right? I don't know. Maybe if I would have been at home, maybe I would have waffled more, but because I was
Mm.
driving and trunk full of groceries is melting ice cream at like 75 degrees, right? I mean, it was sort of a weird day. I had to make a decision fast. And so I felt like there was no question that you should 100% finish.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And that's what I most appreciated about it was you did not waffle. You did
yeah.
not hem and haw. You said, I explained it. I said, as a race director, this is what's being offered to me. What would what do you think? And you said, without a doubt,
Mhm. And
take
it
the
it
finish.
it
Those were your
helped.
words. Yeah.
It helped that I know Steve,
Mm,
and I know that Steve wouldn't yank your chain, right?
mm,
That you were presented with good options. Um, and so it was easy for me to encourage what Steve had offered you and say, yes, this is the right decision, right?
mhm. Yeah. After we had that phone call, I went outside and got another plate of eggs and bacon and and uh, pancakes. And then I went back in and I slept for another hour.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been there for hours now,
Mm-hmm.
but the cutoff is 1 a.m. and I was fully ready to go at 9 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So I left Munns Park at 9 p.m. With Angela. Somehow she had worked it out again that her car was in the right place because I was down for hours, so she had the chance to like move cars and get a ride back and do all these things. And so from Munns Park all the way to Fort Tuthill with Kelly Canyon in between, and you're talking about another 20-mile section, 19.8-mile section. Um, I was with Angela, and we're basically running overnight. We're in Flag, and I'm feeling way better. It is now. I'm now at the point where I think it should be said too, just as a testament to my training that Alicia helped me through was to this point and to the end of the race. Spoiler alert: I never cramped. I never got injured. I never had muscle soreness. I
Mm-hmm.
never was stiff. Even when I woke up, I was never stiff. Um, I was I was a little like slow to get up. Don't get me
Mm-hmm.
wrong, right? But I never had to like stretch. I never stretched
Mm-hmm.
once, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
With one exception, I'll get to that at Fort Tuthill. But I felt so good in my legs. And even though I had these giant blisters under my toenails on my feet, everything was numb. So I had no pain. I had never rolled an ankle. I had never had an issue. And so off we go. And I ran that 20-mile section at probably an average of 20 minutes per mile, which you would think is very, very slow. But it's just like, um, that's doing like some 16s and some
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
17s and some uphill. This is a very like dirt road. That's pretty much all there is to this section. You're kind of following the main highway there. There's pretty undescript. I do remember after we left Munns Park and we were able to get in like a mile 11. There's a small aid station there called Kelly Canyon, and it's one of those that it's not like one of these really big elaborate sleep stations and all this stuff. It's just a small aid station, just like you would expect at any other race. It's the middle of the night, and I was lucid enough and had slept enough that I could say, we're gonna get there. We're gonna thank the volunteers. We're gonna grab and go some food. We are not sitting down, and we are not getting around that campfire because I
Mm-hmm.
knew I would fall asleep if I did, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had that kind of awareness, and we executed perfectly, and we kept on going. As some people now know, the Forest Service did some prescribed burning in Flagstaff
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the day prior, and so we went through a very, very densely smoky area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, you're just cruising on a dirt road, a relatively flat dirt road. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was gross, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, And then we got to Fort Tuthill, and Fort Tuthill is at mile 209, and it is a very elaborate place with a beautiful sleep station that's completely separated. This is where the Eldon Crest 38
Mm-hmm.
does a start at 7 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
But we got there about 3:30 a.m. I'm not. I think the cutoff might have been 3 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Yeah, yeah,
I've gained back a lot of time.
yeah.
So I slept for 3 hours. I woke up because the start of Eldon Crest was really loud and it was
Mm-hmm.
right outside the window. I got a huge plate of food. Angela had arranged with the help of my other pacers to grab someone that I didn't even know was going to pace me, another Mike McLean. He had been volunteering at Fort Tuthill. He got off at 3 a.m. He went to bed and then just waited for me and
Mm-hmm.
was going to pace me for the next section. So that was all arranged. At Fort Tuthill, they have I don't know what you would call them, body mechanic type physical therapy type people. So I had the time to get. I wouldn't call it a massage as much as I would call it like a body mechanics like workover essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So every limb, every muscle got stretched and like that was really 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 nice. I got a ton of food and we left there at 9 a.m. 9
Mm-hmm.
a.m. with a cutoff of 3 p.m., right?
Mm-hmm.
You can
Mm-hmm.
see the gift that I've been given here.
Yeah.
Um, I got
Which
out of
also
there.
speaks to the fact of what you said in the beginning, that if you would have had a chance to execute your plan, you wouldn't have chased cutoff,
No.
because you always would have been so far ahead that you would have been able to sleep, and proper sleep allows you to go faster, and therefore you
Mm-hmm.
arrive at aid stations
Mm-hmm.
much more much sooner, so you can sleep, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
by having being able to sort of jump ahead, you all of a sudden had so much time that the way you could structure your race, your moving and your resting, completely changed
Mm-hmm.
for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I knew that if I could make it to Munns Park, I would be fine, right?
Hmm.
And so, the whole time I'm going, and I'm still thinking about those 23 missing miles. Still thinking about the miles I miss, and I'm doing the math on my bonus miles. I'm like, well, it's not quite 23.
Hmm.
I'm still doing a lot of like justifying in my brain, and I'm still not sure, but I'm gonna finish, right? I'm not
Hmm.
sure how I feel about it, but I'm
Yeah,
gonna
yeah, yeah.
finish. Um, and so Mike McLean gets me to the Walnut Canyon aid station. I get another nap, and they said, how much do you want to sleep? And I said, I want to sleep for 3 hours because I had plenty of time.
Hmm.
And they said, no problem. And 2 hours later, they woke me up and said, okay, it's been 3 hours. Um, Another little lie. And the reason they did that is because I'm now back with Brian Booth, Flagstaff native, who's going to pace me now for, again, for the rest of the race, from Walnut Canyon all the way to the finish. But the sun was still out, and he really wanted me to get started. He didn't want me to wake up in the dark. He
Hmm.
wanted me to get started and get a couple of miles under my legs in the light. Let's watch the sun go down, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, let's get started. Don't spend another hour in bed. And he was absolutely right. And so, yeah, we just continued to crush through Walnut Canyon, climb Mount Eldon, which was very, very frustrating for me because I've done climbs like that so many times, right? It's about a 3,500-foot climb.
Hmm.
It's at the very end of the race.
Hmm.
I've done this a million times and I cannot do it.
Hmm.
I'm taking so many breaks and I'm sleeping and you're like sleeping on your way up there.
Well, you were not the only one. I mean, there were several people who struggled mightily up that hill.
Yes, yes, it was a very, very challenging. Get up there, get to the aid station. Um, it's very warm in that aid station. We have plenty of time. So I immediately sit down. I don't sleep. I don't do anything. I'm just sitting in front of a heater. Or forgive me, I don't eat. And I just fell asleep.
Hmm.
And he let me sleep for 15 minutes. And then I woke up, got a bunch of food, and on we went. And it's all kind of like, truthfully, like downhill from there. So there's a 5 mile, relatively steep dirt road,
Hmm.
but with very little obstacles,
Hmm.
where I cruised that 5 miles. I was very glad for that dirt road because you've
Hmm.
kicked so many rocks at this point. Like you never want to see another rock in your life. Um, one of my toes is now very, very large. The blister is absolutely gigantic. It's like a balloon at this point. And I am feeling that and I'm ready to be done. And the sun is up and I'm rolling into town and there's Dr. Steve with the live stream and he's filming me and I'm being interviewed by AJW, which was epic. Come across the finish line and it's over. And my dream is fulfilled and I feel amazing and I get the buckle and there's no question, there's no asterisk, there's no caveat, right? It was just like you are a finisher. You
Hmm.
finished the race.
Hmm.
Um, I'll skip a lot of the logistics about how I got there the next morning, but I did manage to get a couple hours of sleep before needing to head back to Phoenix to get home. Steve was not at the finish line when I was there. Jubilee was there, which is great. I've never met Jubilee before, and she's kind of a air vibe of celebrity. Took pictures with her, took pictures with Angela, all the finish line vibes and feels, and but I'm so tired, right?
Hmm.
But the next morning, late morning, they're tearing down. Everything's over, right? They're tearing everything down, and it's not the next morning. Sorry, because I finished at like 6 a.m. So
Hmm.
now fast forward to like 11 a.m. It's not
Yeah,
the
yeah,
next day. It's just a couple
yeah,
hours later.
yeah, yeah.
Steve is there,
Hmm.
and he said, "I hope I want you to know that that little missing section does not bother us,
Hmm.
and I hope it doesn't bother you.
Hmm.
And you are an official finisher, and congratulations. And we all have different journeys. There's a lot of DNFs out there, a lot of people that didn't make it this far, and you finished.
Hmm.
Um, and that was the end of my journey. That was the end of my race, and so I've been recovering ever since.
Well, I'm glad you had a chance to connect with Steve about that. And
Mm,
I mean, for me personally, I'm glad that I feel like knowing Steve, I feel like I know how he saw that he didn't offer you this with this like it didn't come out of guilt. It came out of empathy and kindness and
hmm
a larger understanding of what you're out there for. It's not about every mile. It's not about proving a specific math equation or anything, right? It is about a larger human journey. And he acknowledged that and he allowed you to fulfill that for yourself. And I think the that's why you're there for, right?
hmm Yeah, yeah. And so on reflection, if you want to get technical about it, with my bonus miles and my missing miles, I think I ran the Cocodona 230, which I'm very proud of. And I finished, and yeah, it was just really special. And he went out of his way to make sure I understood that, like, I did the right thing by staying with that runner. Um, the reason people didn't come very fast is because those three people behind me all had to be medically evac'd. So there was a lot of medical evacs on that section. There just wasn't enough people at the right time. It's just timing wise, it just didn't work out. So
Which is so surprising that so many people had this stress only 20 miles in, right? For me, putting my
yeah,
race director hat on, I wouldn't have thought that that many people would have been
it's a hard
already.
section and
Yeah.
it's hot. Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hot. It's a lot of climbing and it's completely exposed.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, you know, 5 out of 200 something, right? It's not not a huge percentage, but however many people, and I know several people just like getting up to Crown King, right? They DNF by that point, right?
Hmm.
So there's a lot of different DNFs for a lot of different reasons, and I'm just so grateful that despite my plan kind of falling apart twice in a row, that I had the crew and I had the pacers, and I had the whole team and my coach, who was just like, my coach couldn't be out there, but she was in the text like constantly, right? Like
Hmm. Hmm.
prepping me for the next section and encouraging me. And I couldn't always read all the text because I was pushing so hard, but I'm just very grateful for the team because I am confident, 100% confident, I would not have finished without them.
Hmm. I mean, the story that you told now, and I've had a few people on the podcast that have run 200 milers, and we talk specifically about these 200-mile distances, but I myself have not even thought of ever wanting to do this. And so
Mm,
it's fascinating to me how you're telling a story that is still your story and you should own
mm,
that buckle, but it is a story of an entire team, an
yeah.
entire group of people preparing you, making decisions, taking care of you,
hmm
taking a step in this. And in our world where we almost exclusively kind of operating in our own little bubble and so much of our life is transactional, we're buying ourselves the support by hiring a therapist or a lawyer or the gear that we need, right? We hardly ever in this environment, in this place where we get to be there for other people in that way.
hmm
And to experience that is, especially because it is something that you get to choose, right? I mean, it is, and it's very safe environment. We're not talking about war and whatnot, right? I mean, we
Mhm.
are
Yeah, this
talking
is a
about it.
voluntary recreation, right?
It's exactly, right? This was supposed to be fun, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, to be able to sort of practice human connection and practice empathy and practice
Mhm.
kindness and practice putting ourselves second and doing something for other people is a really sort of an incredible experience, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And all of my worst fears at the beginning about never seeing another runner or having no aid stations or they've only got pickle juice or whatever left. None of that came true. The volunteers were incredible. There's one volunteer, I'm gonna say his name is Paul. I'm sorry, Paul, if I got your name wrong, but I saw him at multiple aid stations. And when I got to Walnut Canyon, it was like the last big section before the finish. I just gave him a big hug and started crying. And he wasn't planning to come to the finish line, but he came and saw me
Mm,
finish and gave me another big hug. This is just a volunteer
mm,
who
mm,
was moved by my story, and um, it was more. It was a like you said, like so many levels of empathy and connection and community that I have never experienced before in any context, in any time of my life, with the fellow runners that were like, I was with runners that were like seeing double. Like, I
mm,
see two of you right now, right? Like, they were in bad shape.
mm,
And I saw runners that were doing great. And it's just like this constant ebb and flow. And if you can do a race like this, number one, do Cocodona and sign up soon, because this is now one of the most popular 200 plus mile races out there.
mm.
And I think that due
Yeah.
to,
Wasn't it already half full before the finish, the final finishers even
I think it's
arrived?
already half full. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about doing it, get signed up, read the policy. I'm sure there's some kind of cancellation waiver or something depending on when you sign up, but um, get signed up if you're thinking about doing it. And I know for me, I'm going to make every effort to get myself back out there next year
Hmm.
and be somebody's pacer,
Hmm.
somebody's crew, hopefully multiple people's pacers. I'd love to be able to string together some volunteering as well as some pacing duties, because I really, really, really want to give back what I got, because I know I couldn't have done it
Mm.
without that team. So again, thank you to Mike and Moose, and thank you to Brian and Ty, and thank you to Cordell, and thank you to my coach Angela, and thank you to my wife Shaylin, who followed every step of the way from home. And then the biggest thanks has to be said to Angela, who was like exceeded everyone's expectations, because how could you expect anything of someone who just like at the very last minute says I'm going to be your crew? Like, you just don't know
Mm.
what to expect. She is the queen of logistics, and she is the strongest athlete that I've ever had the pleasure of running with. And yeah, thanks to all of them, because I could not have done it. I definitely would not have finished.
Well, this was your Cocodona story, and it was thank you for sharing it, and letting me share it. But it is also a little bit the Cocodona story, I think. I
Mm,
think that there's something, there are races where people participate because they want to really achieve a specific time goal or whatever. There are races that people do because they want to see a specific beautiful vista or something, but
mm-hmm,
they go for the scenery. Um, and this thing that I was had in the back of my head as I was preparing for this was like Cocodona isn't really known for a very specific, beautiful, you're gonna overlook that glacier or you're gonna overlook
mm-hmm,
that, water thing or whatever, right? I mean, there isn't really, right? I mean, it's the Arizona desert and stuff. Obviously, it's beautiful in itself, but there isn't the one defining feature. Part of it
mm-hmm,
is 250 miles long, right? So it is there's you can't really narrow it down to one thing, but perhaps it's not really at all about where you run. It is about sort of that human experience
mm-hmm,
that
mm-hmm,
you sign up for yourself, you train for yourself, you commit financially for this, but it brings people together to sort of practice humanity
Hmm.
in a way that is probably like, I don't know, unheard of in, perhaps not even our trail running world, perhaps even. I mean, I know that people are kind in trail races. I know that a station crew can be helpful, right? But I think these 200-mile races, they pull something out of us as humanity that is
Hmm.
something special, right?
It's unique for sure. It's unique for sure. And I can't speak to having run 100-mile race or 100K or anything, and I explain why I haven't done those before. But yeah, it was incredible. I would say that, to your point about Cocodona not having like a defining feature, like this one thing, I think the one thing it has is the diversity because it changes so much.
Hmm.
You start in the Sonoran Desert, you are surrounded by saguaro cactuses. It is not long before you are just up in the mountains, and it's still cactuses, but you're just climbing and climbing and climbing, and eventually you find yourself on this plateau, and then you find yourself in Sedona, which is unbelievably beautiful, red rock formations that just blow your mind. And eventually you find yourself up on this plateau in the pines, and you're at like 6,000 feet of altitude, and you're all still in the same state. And I think that's what's so cool about it is it's just like highlighting the diversity of the landscape from one side of the state to the other, but stringing together historic mining
Hmm.
towns
Hmm.
along the way.
Hmm.
So when you do pop out into town, you're not at Target, you're at some weird old saloon. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
You're at some very strange like place that has like a lot of history to it. So I think they've done an amazing job of stringing it all together. Logistically, permit wise, it must be an absolute nightmare. And I know they had some issues with that
Hmm.
this year, which caused them to shut down the registration, which I think is why the race is half full now, right?
Hmm.
Because they kind of, I think they're anticipating where their max is going to be.
Hmm.
So yeah, if you haven't signed up for 2025, you got a year to prepare. I think that's enough time, and I know a great coach.
So, on one of our training runs a few weeks, a couple months ago, probably or so, you said to me, somewhat in jest, but you said, if I'm going to finish Cocodona, or when I'm going to finish Cocodona, I will never run another mile in my life.
Yeah, that was the training talking for sure. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna spend a year leaning into family because I've spent a year leaning into myself. It's been a
Mhm.
very selfish pursuit.
Mhm.
Um, and so I am not going to intentionally train or, hire another coach or train
Mhm.
for another big race or anything. That doesn't mean I won't like test my fitness and hop into the local 25K or even the local 50K. Who knows? I might be fit enough to do that, but um, I'm not going to do miles and miles and miles and miles of solo, crazy, focused, obsessive training, at least for another year. I'm going to take a year off from that and just really lean into family goals. And we have a lot of stuff going on with the family, but I'll still be running for sure. I'm already jealous that I can't run right now. I can't even put on shoes, let alone run right now. But yes, I'm going to be running. You will see me out there. But it's going to be pretty chill for at least a year.
Ben, thank you so much for sharing your story. You've gone quiet on social media. Do you want to share some links where people can reach out to you? Is anything still active? Where how do people how do people sign up to be paced and crewed by you next year? Let's put it that way.
Oh man, yeah. Well, I am on Instagram. I have a couple handles, so you can find me at Ben Mead 74, or you can still find me at Chasing Cutoffs. I do think that probably part of this process of doing the race has definitely inspired me now that the training is over and all the intensity of that is over. Probably inspired me to start podcasting again. I took a break and it became an extended break, and So I think probably the best place is at Chasing Cutoff. Just find me there. That's where I have the most followers, and hopefully there'll be a new episode dropping soon.
Well, amazing. Ben, thank you so much.
You got it, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ben, for stopping by, and thank you, dear listeners, for joining us and for all your support. More links and info in the show notes at singletrack.fm. This was Singletrack, and I see you over at Electric Cable Car for daily Trail and Non-News. I'm your host, Matthias Eichler, saying auf Wiedersehen und Tschüss.